Welcome to The Explainer. I am so thrilled you're joining us today because we've got a seriously fascinating and honestly kind of complex puzzle to put together. Today we're going to untangle the messy, often totally contradictory rumors of a US-Iran peace deal. But more importantly, we're going to connect those political machinations directly to a looming global economic crisis that the International Energy Agency is actively warning us about. It's a classic case of micro-level politics creating massive macro-level shockwaves, and the data we're looking at today is absolutely staggering.
So, here's our roadmap. We'll be covering the peace deal mirage, leverage and sticking points, the massive oil deficit, what demand destruction actually is, and finally, the global economic toll. Let's just dive right in.
All right, Section 1, the peace deal mirage. The news cycle around these US-Iran negotiations has been, well, nothing short of chaotic. If you've been following the headlines recently, you might have felt a massive wave of relief seeing a recent quote from President Donald Trump. He stated that an agreement had largely been negotiated, final details were being discussed, and, most critically for the global economy, the Strait of Hormuz would be opened. It sounded incredibly definitive, extremely optimistic. It sounded like the crisis was essentially over.
But you might want to brace yourself for some whiplash, because on that exact same day, we got a massive contradiction. The president appeared to just slam the brakes on, stating both sides had to take our time to get it right. He signaled that the US blockade on Iranian ports would remain firmly in place, so literally within hours we went from an imminent deal opening up crucial shipping lanes right back to a maintained blockade with no immediate resolution in sight.
And this whole situation perfectly captures the intense pressure cooker these negotiations are trapped inside of. Reports suggest there's this tight 30 to 60 day window to buy time or basically create political space for these nuclear negotiations. But look at what that window runs right up against, the November US midterm elections. Iran is well aware that as the clock ticks closer to November, the political cost for the US of restarting an already unpopular war goes way, way up. Every single statement and counter-statement is playing directly against this ticking political clock.
Moving on to Section 2, leverage and sticking points.
Let's peel back the curtain on what's actually stalling this diplomatic process behind the scenes. When you look at the sheer geopolitical complexity of the demands side by side, the gap is massive. On one hand, the US and Israel are demanding the elimination of the nuclear danger, specifically the total removal of Iran's enriched uranium stockpile. The US wants to maintain its blockade as leverage, and Israel's Benjamin Netanyahu wants the freedom to defend against threats, including Hezbollah. On the exact opposite side, you have Iran demanding the right to manage the Strait of Hormuz themselves. They're pushing back hard on the uranium demands, wanting rapid relief from sanctions, and insisting that any US deal has to immediately end the fighting in Lebanon. Here's the kicker though, even if they somehow magically agreed in principle tomorrow, the tactical hurdles on the ground are just immense. Take the Strait of Hormuz. Are we talking about an immediate military pullback or a phased one? If they do pull back, who actually conducts the vital minesweeping missions? Is it just the US or international partners? And let's not forget the reality of the ongoing US blockade. The CENTCOM coalition has already intercepted over 100 vessels going to and from Iran's ports. Undoing that entire infrastructure of conflict, that takes a ton of time and incredibly deep logistical coordination. Which brings us to Section 3, the massive oil deficit. While the politicians are busy negotiating leverage, the International Energy Agency is tracking a dire, mathematically verifiable consequence. And the crucial takeaway here is this staggering number, 3.9 million. According to the IEA's monthly oil market report, global oil supply is going to fall by around 3.9 million barrels a day for the rest of the year due to disruptions caused by the war. That is an enormous, almost incomprehensible amount of energy simply vanishing from the global market every single day. Now, compare that massive 3.9 million barrel drop in supply to this next number, 420,000. That's the estimated drop in global oil demand. You really don't need an economics degree to see the terrifying gap here. The drop in supply is vastly outpacing the falling demand. The math simply does not work in our favor. And the cumulative effect of this, it's pretty sobering. We're talking about over 1 billion barrels of Middle East oil supply that have already been lost. Because of this massive gap between supply and demand, countries all over the world are being forced to tap into their emergency oil reserves at an absolute record pace, basically just to keep their economies functioning and the lights on. It's a completely unsustainable band-aid over a gaping wound.
So what happens next? Section 4, what is demand destruction?
Eventually, the market has to forcibly correct this crazy imbalance. When economists at the IEA talk about demand destruction, this is exactly what they mean. It's not some voluntary, eco-friendly choice to use less oil. No, it's a forced reduction. It happens because persistently high prices make it literally impossible for businesses to produce goods competitively and impossible for everyday households to afford their normal consumption. The sky-high prices essentially just crush the economic activity right out of existence. And guys, this isn't just some theoretical economic concept. The The IEA notes it's happening right now. We're seeing real, tangible signs of industrial demand destruction. In some countries, economies are literally slowing down to the point of shifting to 4-day work weeks just to save energy. A substantial amount of industries across Europe and Asia are actively economizing fuel, desperately scrambling for medium to long-term ways to substitute their oil supply. When factories have to shut their doors or scale back simply because they can't afford the fuel to run, that is demand destruction in action, and it takes a whole lot of time and money to get those engines running again once they stop.
Finally, Section 5, the global economic toll. Let's look at exactly who is going to bear the heaviest burden of this economic fallout. This crisis is building a very uneven global picture right now. If we break down the 2024 GDP growth estimates, the United States is actually keeping up, currently estimated to grow by 2.3% this year. But across the Atlantic, Europe is already heavily weighing down its growth forecasts. They're being forced to downgrade because of the spike in oil prices and the wider cascading effects that has on inflation and overall economic activity.
But the disparity gets so much worse when we zoom out to the global stage. Developed nations like the US and Europe face what we'd call a moderate vulnerability. Even with equalized global prices, richer countries have more mature economies, autonomous domestic production capacity, and critically, the capital to substitute their energy supplies if they really have to. However, the global south, regions like Southeast Asia, Latin America, and Africa, face severe vulnerability. These emerging and developing countries are crucially dependent on oil for basic national fuel and daily business production. They simply don't have the financial buffer to absorb these massive price shocks. And honestly, the most alarming part of the IEA's report is the timeline. We're sitting here in 2024, seeing record reserve tapping, but the IEA projects that even if the war ended today and traffic in the Strait opened up in the next few months, it will take a massive amount of time for supply to recover. They project a continued deficit all the way through 2026. 2027, think about that, 2027 is the earliest point where oil supply might actually recover enough to meet demand levels.
So, I want to leave you with this question to really chew on. We started today by looking at a 60-day political window for a peace deal, but the economic reality, that stretches years into the future. Even if the ink dries on a US-Iran memorandum of understanding tomorrow, and the headlines declare a total victory for diplomacy, can the global economy, especially those vulnerable nations in the global south, actually survive the brutal wait until 2027 for energy markets to recover? The geopolitical ripple effect is already in motion, and it's a wave we're going to be riding for years to come. Thank you so much for joining me on this explainer. Keep your eyes on the data and keep learning.